Dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends, welcome to this annual webinar organized by the European Policy Center. My name is Strahinja Subotic, and I will be your host for today. As we do this every year, this year we also have the honor to present to you the latest enlargement package, the 2024 enlargement package, while also leaving some room to discuss the importance of the functioning of democratic institutions in the Western Balkans, which is one of the key sub-areas of the fundamentals cluster. I would like, before we continue, to present you briefly the agenda and technical matters. My idea is therefore to first have the Finnish representative, Mia Lahti, who is the Directorate of the Unit for Southeastern Europe and Enlargement, as part of the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to give her introductory remarks. This is so because this project has come to life thanks to the support of the Ministry from Finland, while being facilitated as well with the support of the Kalevi Sorsa Foundation from Finland and the Progress Institute from North Macedonia. Afterwards, we will go to Director General for Enlargement, DG NIR, who would present the package, the enlargement package, and give us their view of how things have developed in the past year. Once the Commission presents its view and the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we would jump to a short Q&A section, which is why I encourage you to start writing your questions and comments for these interlocutors as soon as you can, and I'll make sure to ask them and to get the response to these questions. Once we're done with this first section, we would move to another one that would be headed by our Think for Europe network, which contains 6 think tanks from 6 Western Balkan partners. And like each year, they would have the opportunity to present the annual reports from their national perspectives, highlighting the key developments, challenges, and opportunities they see looking forward. And at the end of this process, we would have CEP, colleague of mine, Miloš Pavković, who would present the findings of the paper on the functioning of democratic institutions. He's been doing it for 2 years straight. And the overall aim of the paper was to assist the Commission in improving this part of the annual reports that focuses on the functioning of democratic institutions. So he would outline his views of how the Commission has improved in the past year while having this regional perspective at hand. And finally, once he is done, we would go straight to the Q&A questions section. And I should note that this video is streamed on Facebook, so you can access it later on as well. And please don't forget to start putting your questions as soon as possible in the Q&A or the chat section. Before I give the floor to the next speaker, I should note that this event lasts for 2 hours, and I hope you stay along the whole ride and that you enjoy it. Having said this, I would like to check if the Finnish representative is here with us, Mia Lahti. I know you had some technical issues. Are they resolved? Unfortunately, they still aren't. I recommend moving to the DG NIR representative, Jan Koopman, who has been chief in charge of monitoring, developing, and producing these annual reports as part of the latest enlargement package. Mr. Jan Koopman, you have up to 15 minutes to inform of our audience of the key findings and your key thoughts of the latest enlargement package. And in the meantime, we hope that Ms. Lahti fixes her technical issues. Mr. Koopman, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I'm Gert-Jan Koopman, the Director General responsible for enlargement at the European Commission. Obviously, the team that puts together the report is a huge team. I don't do that myself, but I'm very grateful for the hard work of the team. In fact, all of our delegations across our candidate countries that contribute, indeed the authorities that contribute, and the CSOs, many of whom are represented, I think, on this call. So in that sense, it's genuinely a co-production involving many colleagues across the EU and the candidate countries. Now, this year's package is seen by some as one that is not terribly exciting, because there are no huge major announcements of big steps that we recommend to take. But in reality, I think it is probably one of the more exciting packages, reports that we've seen in a long time, because it demonstrates that there is real momentum across both the Western Balkans and the East, and that enlargement, which we have heralded as an incredibly important geostrategic objective, is actually now moving up not one gear, but 2 gears. And I think that is really the message of this year's report, something that we have been wishing for, hoping for a long time, is now actually materializing. Let me briefly illustrate that. We have had cluster openings for Albania on the 15th of October. We opened accession negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova and had the first intergovernmental conferences in June of this year. Montenegro met the interim benchmarks for the rule of law chapters, and we organized an IGC for them also in the middle of the year. This is a very important moment, because reaching the interim benchmarks means that we actually open the door towards closing chapters at large. And just to recall that in March 2024, the European Council also decided to open accession negotiations with Bosnia and Herzegovina. If you look at that in the round, you will have to agree with me that the material acceleration of work on enlargement is very significant indeed. I think what is also very important, and I hope you've noticed that in the report, is that both Montenegro and Albania have set themselves the target of completing the negotiations by 2026 and 2027, respectively. Let me be very clear. This is not about membership as such. It's not a target date for joining the EU. It's a much more subtle and technical objective that actually is also one that is more under the control of the candidate countries and indeed the European Commission, namely the completion of the hard work that is needed, in other words, the closure of all the relevant chapters. One way of looking at this is that the countries have said they want to be ready for EU membership by the end of 26 and the end of 27, respectively. And whilst these are undoubtedly ambitious objectives, the report also signals that this is actually realistic. So that gives a very powerful signal about the materiality of the accession prospects that these countries have, and therefore of the enlargement process at large. So in that sense, I personally find the report, as I said, actually very exciting. It's not about big new announcements, but it's about actually making sure that this shared ambition we all have is going to materialize in the not too distant future. So having said that, of course, the process remains merit-based. That is not going to change, and therefore the hard work that these 2 countries, and indeed all of the candidate countries, need to undertake is still ahead of us. The momentum in the countries concerned in terms of investments that they are making in the accession process is very tangible. Having visited with our president the 6 Western Balkan partners just last week, you can really sense it. The mood, the feeling is really different compared to just a year ago. The resources that are invested in this are different, both at the administrative level, but also the political level, with the leaders of the 6 Western Balkan partners meeting on a quarterly basis to discuss the growth plan, which has now also entered into force. Last year, I think I was explaining the objectives of the growth plan, but the growth plan is there as a policy aimed at ensuring faster economic convergence, but also helping them to accelerate the reforms necessary for enlargement. A critical factor in this regard is that the growth plan, therefore, is a very operational way of making the concept of gradual integration a reality, because a critical element of the growth plan is not just regional integration, through the regional common market, but actually integration in parts of the internal market provided reforms are met, backed up by investments and additional money. 5 of the countries have already finalized their reform agendas, which are very much modeled on the EU's own recovery and resilience plans. They have been adopted by the Commission just last week, and we will be making the first payments under these plans still this year. All of that was developed in record time. As you know, at last year's presentation, we actually presented also the proposal for the growth plan for the Western Balkans. Today, it's a reality. It's not just that the legislation has been adopted, but actually the plans have already been agreed. This is record speed by any comparative standard, and therefore the accession process is being backed up by a very powerful economic convergence process with which it is linked on substance as well. So I think we are really in a very different space today than we were even a year ago. Now, coming back to the report and CFSP alignment, the report notes that Albania, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Montenegro, and North Macedonia are fully aligned. Kosovo has agreed to unilateral alignment. And we also see in the east that Moldova and Ukraine have stepped up their alignment rate, even if they still have some way to go to full alignment. Unfortunately, Serbia and Georgia have a low level of alignment. And the report makes it very clear that as part of becoming a member state, this needs to change, especially with regards to Russia. Turkey, needless to say, where the negotiations are at standstill, has made very limited progress, but there we are engaged in a different type of process aimed at a more transactional, mutually cooperative way of working together in specific areas. So all in all, a very important year behind us, even more important years ahead of us. Let me briefly talk about the individual countries. Montenegro, I already referred to the IGC and the interim benchmarks, the closure of the negotiations by the end of 26. And we clearly signal in the report that we support this. We urge Montenegro to continue the positive trend, addressing outstanding issues, including freedom of expression and media freedom, fight against corruption, organized crime, and accelerating a number of reforms identified in the report. We have very close cooperation with the Montenegrin authorities, weekly meetings. It's this type of pace, a detailed planning to get to the end of 2026. And as I said, we consider this realistic. Serbia has slowed down somewhat the reforms due to early elections, the break in the functioning of the government, but there's also been some progress. And we are happy to note that Serbia are committed to fully implement all of their respective obligations stemming from the agreement on the path of normalization relating to its relations with Kosovo. We also reiterate that that Cluster 3 is ready to be opened, that Serbia has met the opening benchmarks, and we really believe it's now time to do this, and we're working very hard with member states to move in that direction. Now, naturally, we are also concerned about a number of developments. Statements that go against EU positions on foreign policy need to be addressed. We need to be clear about, Serbia needs to be clear about its European choices, also in communication more generally, and progress on the rule of law and normalization of relations with Kosovo will be an important factor that continues to impact on the overall pace of the accession negotiations. Serbia, like Montenegro, has a very good reform agenda that actually contains many critical reforms. It also contains commitments on visa alignment before the end of the year, alignment with another 3 countries. And that, of course, means that some of the choices that are needed for EU member states, for EU membership, will also be delivered through the reform agenda. Turning to Albania, I already referred to the opening of Cluster 1, the IGC. their ambition to close accession negotiations by the end of 27. We hope to have another IGC opening Cluster 6 still this year. We believe that the to-do list, which the report outlines, including reforms of the rule of law, the track record on law enforcement, the fight against corruption, promotion of fundamental rights, that all these issues, including looking after minorities, very important for one of our member states, I don't have to tell you which one, you all know it, that all of this will require hard work, but as I said before, N27 we believe is a realistic deadline. I forgot looking forward, because I was looking forward here for Albania to an opening of Cluster 6, for Serbia Cluster 3. I forgot for Montenegro to mention that we are actually targeting the closure of 4 chapters still in December, which is roughly the same as we have done in terms of closures across all of our candidate countries in the past decade. So the report signals ongoing progress, a high pace of advancement, which is very encouraging. Now, I come to 3 countries where maybe at face value progress has not been so impressive. North Macedonia, of course, needs to deliver on its commitment to adopt constitutional changes, notably relating to the non-discrimination of citizens of all constituencies, other peoples. This has not yet been done. The government knows that it is a condition for opening Cluster 1 and actually moving forward. On top of that, there are a number of other reforms that the government needs to undertake. It's a new government that, frankly speaking, campaigned on a slightly different platform, but following our discussions last week, I am hopeful that they will be able to catch up in the not too distant future. They certainly have made some very clear they certainly gave some very clear indications in this regard. Now, Bosnia-Herzegovina, opening of negotiations, very important step. Unfortunately, after that decision at the European Council in March, progress stalled between April and October. There was, of course, an election, local elections in October, quite a lot of controversy. They also did not manage to adopt their reform agenda. And I think it's now high time that we work together with the country to get them back on track. There are well-known complications also linked to their internal decision-making processes, but progress is absolutely needed. We cannot afford to lose them, and we have signaled very clearly that the EU is willing to assist. Kosovo has made progress in the fight against organized crime. Quite a lot of improvements. They got visa-free travel since January 23, very good reform agenda. We signal that we stand ready to prepare an opinion on their membership application, which dates back to December 2022. But the Council has not asked us to do this yet, and I think this is also a little bit linked to the limited progress on the path of normalization, the difficulties in the north of the country, the escalation that we have seen. So we hope that this can be put behind us, and that Kosovo can join the convoy of countries in the Western Balkans moving towards membership. I already referred to Turkey, accession negotiations at a standstill, but we are working on this proportionate and reversible approach to see how in key areas of cooperation we can move forward. And the report highlights this alongside our concerns about the need to work on a comprehensive and viable settlement of the Cyprus issue within the UN framework. Obviously, we also flag our concerns about issues relating to fundamental rights and the rule of law. Turning to the east now, Ukraine, major step, opening of the negotiations, good progress made. The next step would be the opening of Cluster 1, the fundamentals cluster, hopefully during the Polish presidency. For that, Ukraine should, of course, continue to focus on fundamental reforms. They need to meet the opening benchmarks for Cluster 1, so the roadmaps need to be prepared. The to-do list is long, as you would expect, but progress has also been very significant. So we hope that this will indeed materialize. We should never forget that the country is fighting literally for its survival. So this needs to be factored in as we look at the efforts that are being made, whilst underlining that the merits-based principle will be applied very strictly as well for Ukraine. So it's extremely hard for them. We're providing a lot of support for energy and reconstruction. Difficult winter ahead, we all know. But nevertheless, we see that also under the Ukraine plan, which was adopted last year, the 50 billion Ukraine plan facility with the Ukraine plan attached to it, reforms are being introduced, payments are being made, and I trust that Ukraine will continue to deliver as we move forward. We can come back in the discussion on the geopolitical outlook, which of course is challenging. Moldova, also opening of accession negotiations in June. We have seen very good progress, but equally challenges. We have seen unprecedented interference in the referendum and the elections 2 weekends ago, 1.5 weekend ago, I should say, with a very thin majority adopting the proposal to enshrine EU accession as a strategic objective in the constitution. Elections this coming weekend. We hope that this will not blow them off course as they implement the changes that are needed. And again, here we hope to see the fundamentals cluster opened under the Polish presidency. Now, Georgia is very topical, very difficult situation after the candidate state was granted in December 2023. We've seen a backsliding at scale to the point that the Council decided to put the negotiations on hold. We all know about the foreign agents law. Elections that took place last weekend were clearly marred by irregularities, as observed. Our president has been very clear that the citizens of Georgia have the right to know what exactly happened that weekend. So we are looking at the election result. And for Georgia to get back on track, it will need to reverse course, undo some of the damage that it made, unfortunately, last year, including the foreign agents law, the legislative package on family values and the protection of minors, which was an anti-LGBTIQ package, and we'll need to really invest in maintaining the rule of law and respecting the plurality of political parties in a democracy. So this is going to be a very challenging candidate country, but one that we obviously see as very important, given that the people of Georgia, to a very, very large extent, 80, 90+%, want to see the country joining the EU. So sorry to have been a bit quick. It's a lot of countries I've covered, a lot of material out there, but my central message is maybe the report looks at face value like a very quiet report. The reality is very different. There's huge momentum, a lot happening, and we are very confident that we will push this forward in the year ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You've really provided a precise yet comprehensive overview. We've seen that the list of candidates has increased in number. So I suppose your task has become more challenging, but we wish you all the best as things progress in the following period. And we also share your sentiment that there is currently this momentum, and we hope we actually jointly maximize it. So currently, we have a couple of questions for you, Mr. Koopman. The first one is from Ariel, and I suggest you maybe take the list of questions and then answer them once I read them out to you. Ariel Kurtagic comes from Bosnia, And she argues that although Bosnia seems to be committed to its EU path, there is a notable sluggishness in its process. So her question to you is, what needs to happen for that lag in its Bosnian institutions to disappear? And I would actually follow up. What is the next step regarding their missing reform agenda? Because they were the only ones without it at the moment. The second question is from Anita Blasiska. She makes a very interesting comparison to the European Economic Area. She argues that although its members are not members of the European Union, they are nevertheless regularly invited for consultations during the drafting of new directives and new regulations, whereas candidate countries as part of the accession process are not. So her question is, are there any plans for the European Commission to change that? In other words, to start involving the candidate countries into EU's processes and EU institutions from this point on. The third question is by Nevena Zaric. Just a second. Did the EU representatives get any assurances, hints that Serbia will change its position regarding foreign policy alignments during their recent visit of Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, particularly as Prime Minister Vučević argued that they understood the message of the European Commission. Then we have from Mirko Popovic. If this is maybe if you would like to have a break and then another set of questions, Mr. Kopan, feel free to suggest your preference. I can't hear. Maybe we stop here. You reply to these three and then.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Otherwise, we lose track. So Bosnia-Herzegovina, you asked what is needed next. How do we make progress given the sluggishness? I think it's very clear on the reform agenda what needs to be done. There are a number of outstanding reforms that are challenging for the country. We agreed at the visit that we would resume our discussions now that there is a more stable political situation in the country, and we will need to try to find a way forward. Obviously, the complexity of decision-making renders these discussions somewhat complicated. You call this sluggishness. At the same time, I also note that until March of last year, a lot of reforms were introduced, as a result of which we took the decision as EU to open the accession negotiations. So we should not be despondent. On the accession track, to actually have the negotiation framework adopted by the EU, it is very clear what the country needs to do, including notably adopting the 4 outstanding laws, appointing the chief negotiator. So there is a very clear to-do list, and I trust that the authorities will now address this. We will also assist them. On your second question, very interesting. This has been raised by several candidate countries. It's something to which we are open. Already today, representatives of candidate countries participate in a number of EU bodies and working groups, and we are looking at this across the piece. Obviously, this has to be judged on its merits, also taking account of the administrative capacity of the candidate countries. We need to progress in a deliberate and considered manner, but it's definitely on the agenda, and I personally see it also as part of this gradual integration drive. On foreign policy alignment in Serbia, you all know that the meeting with Mr. Vučević was cancelled. At the same time, we also note that President Vučić did not attend the Kazan summit. Instead, he met with Prime Ministers Tusk, Mitsotakis, and the President of the European Commission. And that, I think, is an interesting and powerful development at a time when the Secretary General of the UN was in Kazan, just to make the contrast. So clearly here, Serbia has a lot of work to do. It is also clear that the messaging is not always uniform or homogeneous. And as our enlargement report signals, this will need to evolve for membership talks to advance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I suggest having another round, maybe final round of questions for you, Mr. Koopman. The first one is a very enthusiastic one by Jovana Đuršić. who is asking at what point will the European Commission be ready to recommend to Council the drafting of the accession treaty with Montenegro? We did talk about some years during this webinar, but we'd like to hear your thoughts on this matter. Then from Mirko Popovic, he argues the necessity to tackle high pollution, particularly air pollution in the Western Balkans, and how this impacts human rights. So he would like to know, what is your opinion on the proposal to include the breaching of the right to clean and healthy environment in Cluster 1 of the report as part of the fundamentals? Then final question from Goran. He says, in the light of last announcement by Borrell, that a choice to choose EU is a strategic decision of one country, it is interesting to see what he meant in comparison to the current path of other countries of the candidates. So he's probably implying that some countries in the region have not committed to the strategic path. That's the last we have from the audience. And I would like to usurp my role as a moderator to pose you also one question. You did indicate that the Commission was ready to support Montenegro and Albania in their signal to complete their accession processes by 26 and 27. But we also know that the European integration, Tanja Mišević, has publicly argued that Serbia aims to finish all acquis alignment by 2027. This was repeated by Minister of Foreign Affairs on multiple occasions. So my question to you is it deliberate, the fact that we're missing this endorsement by the Commission as part of this enlargement package? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Interesting question. So on the first question, when can the Council start working on the accession treaties? Well, it's obviously a decision for the Council, but as far as I'm concerned, they could actually start very soon drafting the relevant parts of the accession treaty as we start closing chapters. These two things can go hand in hand. I personally think that it actually would make a lot of sense to do that, and we would certainly stand ready to assist in this regard. On linking pollution and air quality to the fundamentals, I must admit I'm not so sure that this is a good idea. It's very important, but we have another part of the accession process that looks at environmental matters. So I believe it is better dealt with there. On the statement of the outgoing HRVP, let me say that we obviously have an important issue here of ensuring that membership is not seen as a mechanical exercise. You know, it's a choice for Europe, not just for the laws and the internal market, but also for the values. And that's where alignment with strategic issues becomes important. So that is being looked at as part of the accession process as well. Finally, as far as Serbia is concerned in 2027, you refer to alignment with the acquis. That is indeed a very important part of the accession track, but it is a necessary but not a sufficient element on the road towards completing the various chapters. Let me be very clear. Any candidate country that wants to commit in the same way as Montenegro and Albania have done, asking for a detailed planning of the work, backed up by a genuine commitment to do all that is necessary, will receive from us a detailed planning, and we will engage in exactly the same way. We are neutral in this regard. I very much hope that more countries will do this. I know it's not easy. It requires a certain level of preparation. It requires the strategic choices that we have spoken about. But as far as we're concerned, all of our candidate countries are on their way to becoming an EU member, and therefore we offer them exactly the same level of support, provided they put in place the necessary conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for receiving so many questions and giving us thorough answers. I know you are in need to leave a bit early, but we hope that you will follow the rest of the webinar that will be published online, and that your DGNIR colleagues will remain to listen to our Think for Europe network partners to share their regional perspective on this latest enlargement package. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, and my colleagues will definitely follow. Take good care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Now I would like to turn to double check if Mia Lahti is back with us from the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Mia?
Yes, hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Finally, my apologies for some technical problems in the beginning.
It happens. It happens. I'm very glad that you stayed and you fixed your technical issues. I would like to give you maybe a delayed introductory remarks from the Finnish perspective. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Good afternoon, early afternoon from Helsinki, and many thanks for the opportunity to say a few words to this very timely seminar, and of course to welcome. I see you have a wide participation in this discussion, and it is indeed excellent that the European Policy Center CEP in Belgrade has taken the initiative to have this discussion when the Commission's enlargement package is just very fresh out, and also involving the experts from the region. So looking forward to continue this interesting discussion. Maybe just a couple of words from member state perspective, Finland's perspective. While we are all still, I think, both in EU member states capitals as well as in the candidate countries analyzing the Commission's this year package, I think what is very clear is that the EU enlargement has become one of the top priorities of the EU, both in the capitals and in Brussels. And it will be also among the key themes for the incoming Commission. So the momentum is really there. And at the same time, also not only the work is continuing and proceeding in candidate countries, but also we are very much have already started the discussion within the EU on how to prepare us internally for the next enlargement. And I think it's important for all of us, both in Brussels, in member states and in candidate countries, to ensure that the next enlargement will be successful, making the EU stronger, more competitive, more prosperous. And I think this is where we should put all our effort. Of course, the key motor behind the new momentum on enlargement, if you like, is of course Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine, and that has of course changed the whole security architecture in Europe and made us within the EU more aware of the geopolitical importance of enlargement. And while this discussion is sometimes geopolitics is put against the, let's say, merit-based approach, I think it's important to keep the big picture in mind, and when we discuss the benefits and possible drawbacks of enlargement. And we do need to ask ourselves, how would Europe look today without the big enlargement of 2004? When at the time 10 mostly Eastern European countries joined the EU. Where would Europe be today with the war going on in Ukraine already 2.5 years? What would be the dividing line? So this is an important big picture to keep in mind when we discuss the benefits and drawbacks, if you like, of enlargement. As to the state of play of enlargement, I think the DG Koopman just went through the country specifics. I would just say that if we look at compare the package last year and the package this year, it's clear that lots of progress has happened. We have opened accession negotiations with 3 new countries. We have had a very important intergovernmental conference with Montenegro, reaching the interim benchmarks in a very difficult, the most demanding chapters. And we have opened this chapter also with Albania. So lots has been happening within 1 year. And looking in the future, I will just say that, of course, Montenegro is the most advanced. We do expect also Albania to now that it has reached an important milestone, we expect also Albania to be able to open more clusters in the coming months. All this is very promising, and maybe from a member state perspective, we also hope that this dynamism dynamic brings sort of a positive competition, if you like, among the Western Balkans countries. At the same time, of course, we are all aware of the difficulties, the setbacks in both proceeding with the EU part, I would say in all candidate countries for various reasons, be it bilateral issues, be it other issues. However, I would like to argue that what is different now is that there is a clear commitment from the EU side, from the member state sides, and a real window of opportunity to candidate countries to advance towards the membership. I would also maybe like to highlight what also was the Commission mentioned and what was mentioned here in the discussion and in the questions. The EU membership, it is about making a strategic choice. So it is the choice for the countries themselves whether or not they want to be belong to this club. And with this strategic choice, I also refer, for example, the CFSP alignments and sanctions alignment, which illustrates this choice on its part, and it has become an important part of the process for many member states, exactly because of the geopolitics and including Finland. Finally, maybe a couple of words from Finland's approach to enlargement. We are a long-term supporter of enlargement. We joined ourselves only in 1995, so integration in the post-Second World War Europe. We do see the enlargement as a merit-based process, but at the same time as an important geopolitical tool to make Europe more stable, more secure. And we do stress the crucial importance of reforms related to democratic institutions, rule of law, anti-corruption, market economy, exactly because these lay the foundation for the well-functioning of the EU as a whole. And here we, of course, welcome the recent development when certain candidate countries were also included for the first time in the EU's rule of law reporting. And I think this illustrates very well that the challenges in these fields are crucial, and they don't necessarily stop with the membership or with the joining to the union. But to conclude with these words, I hope this gives a couple of ideas into the discussion from a member state's perspective. I look forward to an interesting discussion, and I hope this will provide new insights and new perspectives to the topic. And I encourage the CEP to continue its important work on enlargement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for giving us the EU member states perspective and for following our work, and of course for providing the overall support. I have one question before we go to our regional partners. We see that despite the geographical distance, Finland is active and interested about the Western Balkans. Your Minister of Foreign Affairs even recently visited Serbia, if I'm not mistaken. So I would like to ask you in how we can push forward this gradual integration that Mr. Koopman talked about. We have the new growth plan. Now we're discussing how we can institutionally involve the candidates into the work, for example, of the Council of the EU. Mr. Koopman talked about involving them in Commission's work, but now how can we involve them in the Council? We as CEP also had our 2 cents on the matter, proposing a way forward in a legally feasible yet effective manner. So I would like to hear your 2 cents on the necessity or feasibility of including the candidates into the Council's work from a Finnish perspective or member states' perspective.
Yeah, thank you very much. We do support the gradual integration. We think it's a good idea to sort of also, let's say, include the candidate countries in the work in the EU to get a sort of a better understanding how the EU actually works already before the membership. I think there are very good ideas from the Commission, concrete ideas when it comes to, let's say, single market, which of course is, I think, for example, the single payment area is one concrete step where work is to be expected, and some gradual integration steps are going forward. As to the Council work, I think from our perspective, it has been a very good idea, for example, to include the Western Balkans countries or other candidate countries, but we do this in different formats. But for example, Western Balkans countries in the informal discussions of the Foreign Affairs Councils on a regular basis. So this has, in recent years, this has been a regular exchange of opinions, and it's important to have the opportunity for this dialogue and to sort of have the candidate countries also to have their perspectives heard in the discussion. So maybe these.
All right, thank you very much, and we hope in the following period we'll build upon this foundation to push it forward. Thank you very much. Now I would like to move to our Think for Europe network partners. I should note that we are celebrating our 11th, if I'm not mistaken, anniversary together, which is a unique example of how despite the differences that countries of the region might have, that actually think tank community has the same goal, has the same vision, which is a reformed, a more democratic, stable, and peaceful Western Balkans. So with that in mind, I would like to go to our partner, Daniel Proni from IDM Albania, to give us his overview of the Albania annual report for 2024.
Thank you, Strahinja, and thank you everyone for joining this webinar today. In the case of Albania, since the last 2 years, since the enlargement got rebooted, it did indeed produce some results. In this last 2 years, we've opened negotiations, we've finished the screening process for all clusters, and started negotiations for the first cluster on the fundamentals. And during this time, a lot of products and documents have been produced: country reports, rule of law reports, screening reports, reform agenda, and to a certain extent with a degree of repetition. But it all signals, at least, that there is movement and there is a desire to push things forward. And while I agree that the moment is opportunist to advance, and without wanting to ruin the mood, I'd like to add a few notes of caution to the proceedings. And as also Mr. Koopman said, both sides, both the EU and Albania, have signaled their ambition to conclude the negotiation process by 2027, and hopefully consider 2030 as a finish line for the accession. But looking at the annual report, does the pace of the progress respond to this promise or to this ambition? Well, the report states that Albanian authorities are ambitious, but ambition is one thing and results are another. And we see that in this reporting period, only 4 chapters have improved their preparedness as measured by the annual report. Whereas in terms of progress, we see that during this reporting period, again, progress is improved only in 4 chapters, while declining in 11 areas. Well, I say areas, not chapters, because there we see decline also in some areas that are not officially chapters, such as public administration reform, freedom of expression, that are within the first cluster. So if we see at the assessment as made by the European Commission using their scale of measurement, we see that 33%, almost more than 1/3 of the chapters have a low level of preparation. 45% of them have a medium level of preparation, and 21% have a high or a good level of preparation. And this is the result of more than almost two decades of work to arrive at this point. And in terms of progress, we see that 81% of the chapters show a limited or some level of progress, and only 9% show a good level of progress. And to put this year's report in perspective, for example, last year's report showed that just 1 chapter had no progress, which was the competition policy. Whereas this year, there are 4 chapters that have recorded no progress, including critical areas like freedom of expression or the right to establishment. And in terms of implementing recommendations, which are laid out in the report, all chapters, with the exception of chapter 32 on foreign security and defense policy, show that recommendations were only partially recommended and remain valid and are carried through in the subsequent year. Some also showing no progress at all in doing this. Well, it is understandable that a country like Albania has some capacity constraints to tackle all recommendations within this 12-month period. Some items also require in itself more than a 12-month period of intervention, but some are also, the lack of implementation of some are also down to political will, as some of these recommendations tackle measures that are necessary to maintain political power. And as such, then we see that the government has little appetite to address them. I take, for example, the electoral reform, for which even the report notes that there has been no results, just a few minor tweaks to the electoral code, but without mounting to a serious intervention or of the recommendations coming also from OSCE ODIHR. It knows that the parliament continues to be overshadowed by the executive and practically unable to oversight it properly. And there is a high political polarization in the country, which signals that there is not a conducive political environment to undertake the necessary reforms that are needed to advance in the EU reform, in the EU accession process. Add to this polarization also a weak media and a weak consultation of civil society organizations. Well, it seems that the executive is the only one behind the wheel. As such, it does not correspond to the comprehensive effort that's needed by all actors to push forward this strategic goal. One of the worrying items was that in the freedom of expression there was no progress, but at this point I actually don't understand what more needs to happen for it to be considered a backsliding area. As journalists report deterioration of their working conditions, media ownership remains highly concentrated and intertwined with business interests. So at what point do these issues that have persisted for years, if not decades, amount to backsliding? And in this sense, we know that there's also some other contradictions in the report. For example, in the same paragraph, it says that the government has shown commitment to the EU accession process, and 2 sentences later, it says that the government continued to adopt policies and laws that raise concerns regarding the respect of EU standards. So as such, it's a bit perplexing or difficult to understand. And on the fundamentals chapter, for which negotiations have started, the report does notice the progress made in tackling grand corruption of high-level officials, mostly by the special prosecution, and notes that the vetting process for the justice reform that has been undertook in Albania for the last 8 years is finally coming to an end, or at least a finish line is in sight, at least for the vetting process of all judges and prosecutors in Albania. However, work is not yet over with the justice reform as such, although we now have a more stronger and robust normative framework, but still more careful work is needed to ensure the independence of the new judiciary bodies, the merit-based appointments, and the lack to avoid political interference. So all this to avoid that old habits crack their way into the new system of the justice. So, except for the normative interventions, also some soft measures need to be undertaken to safeguard it to foolproof. In terms of anti-corruption, the report states that Albania is between some level and moderate level of preparation. In my reading, I would associate some level with the preventive aspect of anti-corruption and a moderate level with the investigation part of the anti-corruption. So while we see improvement in investigating it, the preventive measures are still the weak point. Hence the great workload that the special prosecution has to go through every day. And as such, the report notes that corruption is still at disturbing levels in some sectors such as police, customs, property management, and public procurement. And on this note, we see maybe another inconsistency that while it recognizes the very high levels of corruption in public procurement, yet it states that the country is moderately prepared in the public procurement chapter. Lastly, on the economic criteria, it knows that it has a good level of preparation and that it has experienced constant economic growth. But we see that also this growth has been underachieving or at least not up to its full potential. And worse than that, inequalities within social groups have been widening, which not necessarily means that the economic growth is translated to well-being for the citizens. So overall, while there has been some improvements, and the report does note this, neither from a statistical reading of the report nor from the content of it shows that the pace corresponds to the ambition that's laid out. This is also backed by the third-party indicators that are used for the fundamentals cluster, for which also CEP has been advocating the last few years. And the majority of these third-party indicators show that there is a decline in the status of democracy, good governance, and rule of law in Albania. And lastly, another warning indicator that maybe does not align with the 2030 vision is the rate of economic convergence of Albania and of the region with the EU average. And it seems that this convergence will take actually more time than maybe the harmonization process will take of laws and policies and frameworks.
All right.
Yeah, to conclude just on the communication of the report, again, it seems that the public here, at least here in Albania, did not, so the report does not feed the public discussion anymore in Albania. It does not gather much attention. And lastly, maybe just to add a note on the EU side, what has it done to prepare itself? And while there has been a communication from the Commission on the pre-enlargement reforms and a report from the Group of 12 outlining these measures, little has been done in the reporting period. And to adopt maybe the Commission's language, I would say there has been some progress, but with a limited preparation on that side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure the Commission will value your critical positioning vis-a-vis the paper and try to address the inconsistencies and contradictions that you pinpointed, maybe for the next enlargement package. So hopefully we can rediscuss it in a year's time. Now I'd like to go to Zvonimira Jakic, Foreign Policy Initiative from Sarajevo.
Thank you very much. Hello to everyone. Esteemed Mrs. Lahti, dear colleagues and distinguished participants. Unfortunately, today we are faced with the fact that, unlike other countries, Bosnia and Herzegovina achieved the least progress in a general rating of 1.67, with the main comment, no changes, which really caused great concern in Bosnia and Herzegovina when compared with the results of the other countries rated from 3.10 to 2. Preparation in 33 chapters remained unchanged from 2023. With no progress in 20 chapters, limited progress in chapter 9, which all know that is financial services, in which it's advised to improve cooperation between banking agency, medium-sized banks, and others, with the aim of adopting a common work methodology with the harmonization of legislation with the legal acquis of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Also, limited progress in Chapter 3, which is the right of established businesses and a freedom to provide services, where there is no progress in developing a state law on services that really covers its principles, and strong coordination between all levels of a government is really, really needed for harmonizing laws in this area. Also, legislation doesn't provide for mutual recognition of qualifications of occupations, and also the general plan for harmonization with the EU access is really not been implemented, and there is no contact point of, for example, e-administrator to help our citizens. But what is very positive, that we have a good progress in chapter 31, that is a foreign security and defense policy that is really continued a political dialogue between the European Union and Bosnia and Herzegovina on foreign and security policy issues, including that in a high level. But Bosnia and Herzegovina really has achieved and maintained full compliance with the European Union Common Foreign and Security Policy, which is a signal and a clear signal of the commitment to the European path. But security measures, the state continued also to implement the agreement with the European Union and security procedures for the exchange and protections of classified data. Bosnia and Herzegovina also showed some results between November 2023 and now March 2024, such as a full alignment with the common and external security policies, and also adoption of laws on the integrity of the justice and the fight against money laundering, and also a conflict of interest, as well as migration management, which is partly showed in a commitment of the political leadership to European integration in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Unfortunately, there has not been a progress in the fight against corruption. Efforts to establish records of proactive investigations, also criminal prosecutions, and final judgments are very, very insufficient. Given that we are also representatives of a civil society of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the region, it is very important to know that in the context of Bosnia and Herzegovina, that the topic of its report was the entity also of Republic of Srpska. The legislative framework with a focus on the draft law on foreign agents really emphasized that the government of Republic of Srpska in May 2024 initiated this mentioned law, which according to, of course, the European Commission and all representatives of a civil society should not be initiated, because it would negatively affect democratic values and basic freedoms and represent a step back for Bosnia and Herzegovina. Also, when we are speaking about those topics, we have to mention the criminalization of defamation, which really affects civil society, and our organizations cannot be organized by freedom and expression of freedom, for example, for a media, which limit really media and civil society in their activities through really big political pressure and intimidation. After March, there was a standstill in the implementation of reforms. We entered a nature characteristic by the rhetoric and actions aimed at division instead of a dialogue, compromises that are key for a better European future Bosnia and Herzegovina. Country really must continue with the decisive steps towards finalizing the key reforms in accordance with the European rules and standards. I really hope that the signs of a return to a positive dimension will be established again in Bosnia and Herzegovina, because when we formed a new government with the opposition in Bosnia and Herzegovina, they were very positive with the European Commission that we really are in the path and on a European path for Bosnia and Herzegovina. But unfortunately, that is not the case right now, because also we are seeing the bright examples, such as a signed agreement with Eurojust. Also, negotiation on the Frontex agreement are very at advanced stage. But also, we see a progress in the mobility agreements with a part of a Berlin process and the unblocking of the Parliament of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which really means that the next steps can be positive and can lead to further progress. The European Commission really showed objectivity this time as well, but also took into account the opinion of the civil society, because we are working on a ground, and they are also emphasize their readiness to help Bosnia and Herzegovina on its European path in the form of scheduling additional sessions to explain, adopt the EU acquis. Also, for the 8 key steps required for adoption of the negotiation framework, the determination of the date for the official start of accession of negotiation, the European Commission. European Commission decide not to access the progress explicitly. However, the notification is some concrete activities in each of the 8 steps, most of which took place before the decision of the start of accession negotiation in March 2024. They also could start official talks in the decision, provided that it continues activities listed in those 8 steps, and also adopts at least 4 pieces of legislation, such as a Port of Bosnia and Herzegovina, border control, protection of personal data, the appointment of the chief negotiator and IPA coordinator is also expected, and the actual reform agenda is still, as we know, awaited. But it is very interesting that the Commission noticed the really big active participation of our country in the work of this four pillars, especially in the reform agenda. And in my personal opinion, the report is a very good symbol of European commitment to enlargement, while acknowledging the result achieved, while highlight areas for empowerment to enable effective integration. And I think that Bosnia and Herzegovina, as we also mentioned every time, is now in a good way of European integration, but there is so much more work for us.
Right.
So thank you very much for everything.
Thank you. Unfortunately, things are never simple in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we hope that things do get simpler as we speak and as time progresses in the following period, and that it indeed joins other candidates in this European enlargement momentum. Thank you very much. And now we draw our attention to Pristina, that is Dea Fatiu from GLPS, to give us her thoughts on the latest annual reports.
Thank you so much, Dragna, and thanks for everyone for being here and listening to our first reading of these reports. As you also heard from the opening remarks, you could see that Kosovo has progressed in some areas, but also having very limited progress in others. Currently, the progress rate for Kosovo is 2.02. And it has made notable progress in only 2 of the chapters or areas, namely the Chapter 24 on justice, freedom, and security, and Chapter 19 on social policy and employment. There are additional advancements across all of the other sectors that all remain necessary to meet the EU standards fully. And GLPS's ongoing work and providing expertise in many of the fields that are tackled in the report are very well reflected in the report's findings. In general, Kosovo is standing on some level of preparation in a total of 14 areas, while it's still on early stage of preparation in 8 areas and moderately prepared in only 7 areas. This year, the Kosovo has shown good progress in 4 areas, while limited progress is still the most used word throughout the whole report in a total of 17 other areas. I'm going to just tackle all of the fields mentioned in the report and give GLPS's opinion in most of them, starting with the fundamentals of accession, where the report expresses a big concern on the effectiveness of legislative processes in general. The report notes that the assembly in Kosovo is facing several challenges, which are mainly due to the political divisions between the majority and the opposition parties. We have seen an autumn session of the assembly, which has been quite inactive, with the legislative agenda being moving very slowly and impeding its legislative capacities. The report, again, similar to all the other years, is suggesting more dialogue between the parliamentary groups in Kosovo and improvements in management practices within the assembly. The report also notes the domestic political divisions, which also are seeing as hindrances to the EU agenda's implementation, while the reform agenda is being praised. And it highlights Kosovo's progress in some of the agenda's implementations, such as progress in gender equality at multiple levels and the presence of an enabling environment for a very diverse civil society here. Regarding the public administration reform area, the report vastly mirrors GLPS's views, as it noticed positively the success of one component of the PAD process, namely the Administrative Burden Reduction Program. However, the report notes big strugglings with Kosovo's public administration, with staff retention, and the big amount of vacant positions and acting positions within the Kosovo public administration, which is further hindering the EU agenda's implementation as well as other policy-making areas. The report also flags the law on public officials for needing more alignment with EU principles of meritocratic principles to promote career stability. With regards to the judiciary and fundamental rights, Kosovo still remains at an early level of preparedness, similar to the past years, and it requires further improvements in corruption, prosecution, and case management efficiency by our judiciary. The report notes noticeable progress in judging corruption cases by Kosovo courts, because this year it was the highest number of final court decisions and convictions on corruption cases. However, the report, as well as our monitoring findings, raise big concerns on the impartiality of the judiciary and prosecution in both low-level and high-level of corruption cases. The report asks for stronger commitment in fighting high-level corruption and calls for strengthening other agencies that are dealing with corruption, such as Kosovo's Agency for Prevention of Corruption. It also calls for many additional legislative and strategic documents, such as a new national strategy and action plan against corruption, to be in line with the EU principles and EU reform agenda. Onto the fundamental rights, there are some fundamental rights legislation progress observed. However, the problem is with implementing these laws, especially for non-majority community rights, which have been one of the categories that this year their rights have been assessed to not have had any progress. Additionally, it notes with concern the hate speech used by public figures in their social media, including the members of the parliament, who are using denigrating and threatening language towards different categories of our population. On freedom of expression, the report notes that Kosovo's Independent Media Commission has improved. However, it also notes with concern that there are several governmental attempts to control media, which are mainly done through the new law on Media Regulator Commission, which are seen as contradictory to EU principles and to EU recommendations for Kosovo. On justice, freedom, and security, this is one of the two sections where Kosovo has seen an improvement and now has reached some level of preparation assessment. In this case, the report, the Commission praised Kosovo Police's reaction towards the terrorist attack in Banjska and recognized it as highly professional, and also knows the recruitment of a new generation of Kosovo Serb police officers. In this sense, what contributed to the progress here is also the additional prosecutors who were recruited for the Special Prosecutor's Office, which have led to a very big increase in indictments against organized crime in Kosovo. Moreover, onto the fight with organized crime, Kosovo's cooperative work with Europol and asset confiscation is recognized as a big improvement. However, it still requires Kosovo to adopt more strategic documents, such as an organized crime fighting strategy and improving high-profile crime prosecution. Another area with notable progress have been the functioning of market economy, as now Kosovo also has some level of preparation and marked good progress from last year. It managed to reduce the budget deficit and also was supported by stable economic performance. However, on the sphere of public procurement, similar to other countries in the region, the Commission finds this field as particularly vulnerable towards corruption. Chapter 19 on social policy and employment is one of the other chapters that has seen a very good progress and marked now to some level of preparation. This is mainly attributed to the progress in youth employment and workplace safety, which was done by the increased inspection in high-risk workplaces. Onto the last field, on normalization of relations with Serbia, we could see that the report contains the very same content in this field for both Kosovo and Serbia's assessments. Here it stresses the need for both parties to implement all of the obligations which derive from the Ohrid Agreement. For Kosovo, this means that the Commission is expecting a start of establishing the Association of Serbian Majority Municipalities, while for Serbia, it calls for an initiation of the recognition of Kosovo's institutions, documents, and symbols. We note here that we expect the EU to employ a very balanced approach while also expecting from both parties to perform all of their contractual obligations by now. Additionally, the report notes a very high rise in the tensions in the north of Kosovo and recognizes insufficient steps by Serbia to ensure accountability for the Banjska attack. This is the Banjska terrorist attack is also deemed as the gravest escalation in the recent years. Moreover, the EU expresses concerns about the lack of coordination by Kosovo's government and the very negative impact that some of the measures had on the people on the ground. EU welcomes some of the achievements of the dialogue, however, which mainly rely on the recognition of the license plates, which happened early this year, and also the removal of plates with Kosovo city denominations, which were issued by Serbia. Overall, the report, we can see that calls for both countries to demonstrate a more serious commitment and will to advance the normalization procedures, avoiding harmful rhetorics, which are usually hindering the dialogue in Brussels as well as the reconciliation on the ground. Even though the language here is not that new, we're kind of used to seeing such language in also the previous year's report. We again note that EU should ensure a more balanced approach towards both parties while recognizing that measures against Kosovo have not been lifted yet. So to conclude, Kosovo has made some progress in 2 chapters, justice, freedom, and security, as well as social policy and employment. However, we face still many critical challenges in all of the other fields. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, we do hope that things get more stable and peaceful in the following period, that both sides commit to normalize the relationship, and that your report and other reports don't feature as many words that point to limited progress in different chapters. Thank you very much. I'd like to go to Podgorica, to Marko Sosic, who will walk us through the Institute alternative view of the annual report from Montenegro.
Hello, everyone. Regards from Podgorica, from Montenegro, the next EU member state, as you have heard in the keynote speeches. Regards from the leader in the region and the front runner. If we are indeed the most advanced in the region, then I feel very sorry for the rest of you. Forgive me for being cynical when I hear the words leader and front runner and most advanced, because we have been hearing it in the period before 2020, before the political transition, when the reforms were mostly simulated and not really implemented. So we are a little bit frightened from that jargon, especially now when if you read the report that was published yesterday, you don't really see the progress that was mentioned about at least Montenegro. When I was reading it yesterday, the report felt as critical as some of the previous reports in all regards, except those that are undoubtedly those that have undoubtedly happened in the previous years, such as getting the fulfilling the conditions for the closing benchmarks for chapters 23 and 24, and successfully doing some appointments and legislation changes in the rule of law area. Therefore, I would like to caution or give a little word of warning. In the civil society, we are extremely worried by some of the findings in the European Commission's report, which are still extremely critical, at least in those areas that we monitor. For example, if you look at the public administration reform, it's as bad as ever. Nothing has happened. If you look at the some of the statements made by the European Commission in the report about, for example, the Parliament, you also see certain phrases which I can interpret as being a little bit superficial. For example, it seems like they are blaming the opposition for the bad state of the oversight function that the Montenegrin parliament is currently exerting. There are some imprecise statements, such as asking for more decentralization from local municipalities, although a couple paragraphs later, they do mention that there is a enormous rise in the number of employees at the local level and in the public sector in general as a sign of the overall politicization of the public sector apparatus. There are some inconsistencies as well. It was very funny yesterday when we read that in the chapter 10, which is one of those that are going to be closed provisionally by the end of the year, which is digital transformation in media. It was assessed as having considerable progress. And just yesterday, we received a letter from the Ministry of Public Administration, which notified that the annual implementation report for the digital transformation strategy for 2023 is not done yet. It's not over yet. 8-10 months in this year, we still haven't reported on what has happened in 2023, and not a lot has happened. Not a lot of progress did happen. So it seems to us that while there is a healthy dose of optimism, and that while we do register that the EU path is back on the agenda of key decision makers in the country, the actual situation on the ground is painted rosier than it is in actuality, and it has a lot of potentially bad consequences. This hasty road towards Montenegro's integration, which would actually, for example, foresee that by the end, so in the next 2 months, we will close 4 chapters. And then in the next 2 years, we will close additional 26 chapters, which basically comes down to closing 1 chapter per month. I get a little bit frightened from that statistics because from the experience that we had in the adoption of EBAR report this year. In this hasty process, the participation of the public and transparency are often sacrificed, and even the quality of the documents. I would mention that, for example, in order to meet the interim assessments, we had to assemble and scrap together anti-corruption strategy in less than a month, which is very bad, but was accepted by the EU as satisfactory. Or that, for example, when we were discussing the set of judiciary laws that were conditioned for closing, meeting interim benchmarks and getting the EBAR, the MPs were actually forbidden from exercising their constitutional right of amending the legislation. Nothing could be touched in those laws. Even the obvious mistakes couldn't be corrected because they needed to be harmonized with the European Commission. So we are extremely afraid that this hasty process now for Montenegro will have a damaging impact on the openness and participatory character of decision-making, which is actually the basis of the EU integration process. We are also very afraid of the simulation of the process. If you could divide all the integration activities into 3 broad categories, such as appointments, legislation, and implementation, we are the best at first 2. And when it comes to implementation, we are still lagging behind considerably. And we are afraid that certain superficial steps are going to be taken as signs of key progress, while in fact nothing on the ground changes. I took the example of public administration reform, where we are, for example, probably worse than ever in terms of the actual commitment and the implementation on the ground. And although this is reflected in the report, but you don't hear it mentioned as critically by the EU officials as before, which for us takes away the important tool of calling upon the government to be accountable in this regard. And there is also a huge risk in terms of political composition of the government, which is now in this weird, very varied coalition, and that has resulted in the most cumbersome and most numerous cabinet or government in the region and wider. And a part of this coalition is actually sabotaging the EU agenda by constantly involving issues in the public discourse which have nothing to do with the integration process, which actually damage it, which actually increase the divisions in the society, or get us into bad terms with our neighbors. And I should probably stop now, but I didn't want to talk about the report itself so much as more.
No problem. Your words have been very refreshing. I think this is a good lesson for other Western Balkan countries and for the Commission looking forward, particularly that there is a difficult need to reconcile the need to have the momentum, to exploit the momentum, while avoiding the dangers of hastily processes that may result in sometimes simulated reforms, which is not something that we as citizens would like to have. So thank you very much for that refreshing outlook of the latest developments. Now I'd like to give the floor to Simonida Kaczarska from EPI to give us her thoughts from Skopje on the latest annual report.
Thank you, Strahinja. Good afternoon. It's not anymore such an early afternoon as we heard from Helsinki. I think we kind of dragged it a bit longer than we should. I'm not sure if Milos will have the time, and I'm seeing that we still have 125 people with us, so thanks for staying an hour and a half so far. For Macedonia/North Macedonia, this is actually I was counting yesterday, the 18th progress report, actually. Even if we don't count the analytical report for membership, we are turning 18 this year. So the country's been for a very long time in this, and we've done the analysis for quite some number of years now of where we stand. And going back as to the period that this report covers, it covers a period in which we had a government change, a major government change after 7 years. So kind of the responsibility for what's in the report is shared, which is quite different than what's the case in most of the countries. It's shared by the opposition and the government in power. So it's kind of, I think that on that note, we don't have such a political debate as we might have some other in other years, because the responsibility for the good and the bad is rather there. We heard previously from the Commission that North Macedonia is still expected to adopt the constitutional changes which were agreed, which were requested as part of the Council conclusions. So it's not opening a cluster, as was the case with Albania in October, and this is the state of play. But at the same time, so formally, basically, we are now, let's say, after Serbia, Montenegro, Albania, so we will be somewhere further in the queue in the formal accession process than we would like to. But at the same time, if we take a look at the discussion on preparedness, I mean, probably that's the message that first needs to be conveyed. We are still with the group with Serbia and Montenegro. This is a result mostly of the preparedness that the country reached effectively in the first 6 or 7 years of its accession process. This is a preparedness that we reached somewhere by 2011. And since then, we don't see a lot of movement, but as we don't see also across the region in terms of raising the preparedness to what would be a good level of preparedness for the Commission. It's usually in most of the cases, now we see Montenegro going ahead, but in most of the cases, we're still somewhere at the moderate, although we are at the more positive end of the moderate still. If we zoom in on the last year, we have chapters in which there's some progress in areas which relate to agriculture, fisheries, and traditionally, as we've heard across the board, the CFSP, with the one exception that's about to come. So I think that's for the legislative changes were evidently marked, but the progress is rather weak. We can consider, but as I said, this is a result of a change of government. It's an election year. And it's a result also of the stagnation that's been happening over the last year. Most of the work, in effect, was actually directed towards the preparation for the reform agenda of the growth plan, and that is the materialization of that is yet to come. Also, we can have a separate discussion on how much actually will those interventions in the reform agenda improve the preparedness level, because that's our main goal from our main discussion that we here have today. On preparedness, we have some slight improvement. I know, I mean, sometimes we debate in our geeky circles on how do we quantify. We do have a bit of a discussion. The European Western Balkans yesterday had one of the attempts. Essie will probably have the other, and we will as well. But we have slight improvements in the preparedness in statistics, in external relations, industrial policy, and fight against organized crime. But these are very small ones. It's probably something we would quantify as 0.5 rather than 1. So in that sense, this is not the speed that's optimal in terms of accelerating the process. And I think this is something that was shared also across the board from many of the colleagues, that if we are aiming at, if any of the countries are aiming at 2027, 2028, the speed of increasing the preparedness will need to be much higher. As for the bigger story of the fundamentals, I think that last year we hit very much a low in North Macedonia in terms of the no progress in the judiciary, which also, going back to Daniel's discussion, we were wondering whether it would actually go in the negative direction towards backsliding because of some very contested criminal code changes that we had. While that was the weakest link of last year's report, this year probably for me it's the corruption, it's the fight against corruption, because actually the country has been determined to have made no progress against corruption. And this is concerning because, as we know, also with the new methodology, corruption is a horizontal issue that's mainstream. To the other point that is very concerning for most of us, given also the 18 years of experience, is that the Commission raises quite, and fairly so, quite many concerns about the capacity to coordinate the European integration process, and also the capacity in Chapter 22 structural instruments, which has much bigger implications also over the other processes which are yet to come, for the reform agenda. And this is rather also reflected in the weak assessment on the maturity of the infrastructural projects, which was just published last week as part of the assessment of the Commission on the viability of the reform agendas. These are bigger issues which have implications over the overall process, and at the end of the day, I think we are grateful for this, putting them in the spotlight, because it will help us from the ground to make more pressure down the road. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being concise and on point. And it is unfortunate that North Macedonia was the first one to get the candidate status, and now it has yet to get a cluster opened. So we hope that changes as well. Now, last but not least, my colleague from Belgrade, European Policy Center, Srđan Majstorović, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Strahinja, and thank you for your role as a moderator, and for introducing us with the name role in accordance with the alphabet. It is the right way to behave, because this is the way how these countries are going to have their terms in the EU to speak, if they join the EU sooner rather than later, as we all hope. This is something that we need to get accustomed to, and regardless of who is the host, we need to respect some protocol, if you wish. I think I don't have to explain to the audience, because I took a look at who is in the room, and these are all excellent experts who certainly went through the report on country reports of the respective countries. So I will perhaps now go in. I'm not going to go into the details, but just share some of my major takeouts from this year's report. To start with, I would like to thank European Commission for the excellent job. I think The report for Serbia is well balanced, I would say. It's a mixed bag of some progress, little progress, no progress, but in the essence and in the substance of the EU accession process, I'm afraid that Serbia is again underperforming, because if you take a look at the level of preparedness of Serbia to join the EU after 10 years of the EU accession talks, to score just a half a point improvement in four areas, four chapters, it's simply, yeah, underwhelming. And it basically shows how dedicated the government and governments, because we are in the mode of a music chair style of governments coming in and out. The president has announced that very soon we are going to maybe have another reshuffling of the government. And these are all circumstances in which it is very difficult to dedicate your efforts, your capacities to deal with such a demanding and complex transformational process as the EU accession should be. And this is why some references from the report has a particular weight in it. And first of all, the one concerning the strategic orientation of Serbia. If after 10 years of the EU accession talks, the European Commission still demands from the government of Serbia to clearly designate its strategic orientation, this is a sign that there is a lack of understanding of Serbia's position and a lack of trust in what Serbia's EU integration process represents. Yes, there are good relations with the EU, its member states, Western partners with regards provision of arms and ammunition to Ukraine, but until Serbia does not introduce sanctions against Russia, this relationship will never be based on trust, but on a sheer opportunism and pragmatism that cannot be the basis for development of a long-term relationship, hopeful in the same club sooner rather than later, as is said. Particularly concerning are the mentionings of the lack of respect of already existing recommendations from the European Commission from the last year's report. A couple of places in the report, one who reads the argument and reads that Serbia failed to address the recommendation from the last year, again is pointing a question mark. What exactly is Serbia's EU integration policy, and does it exist? I don't want to insult good people who are working on the EU integration efforts throughout the administration. There are those who are diligently performing, but unfortunately their performance is not appreciated, since the lack of obviously clear and unambiguous political willingness and interest to go full power speed when it comes to the respect of the obligations which are deriving from the membership in the EU. This morning I was asked what does the 0.06 or 7 point represent to citizens of Serbia, and I said this is a difference between the last year's average grade with regards to the fulfillments of the criteria for the accession, and yesterday's report's increase in 0.06 points. I said, yeah, that doesn't suffice to their expectations, and that doesn't make their life better for 0.06 points. I would also like to mention, and I'm aware that Miloš, my colleague, Miloš Pavković, will later talk about it much more in depth. But I want to simply acknowledge that the European Commission listened to the civil society organizations in the past period, and did, or rather perform some assessment of how democracy actually work in the societies in the Western Balkans, or rather among all the candidate countries. And on this list, it's quite revealing that Serbia's, for example, democracy falls far behind Montenegro, Moldova. There is one more country that I unfortunately forgot at this time, but nobody's going to take it for against me.
North Macedonia.
I beg your pardon?
North Macedonia.
North Macedonia, yes, of course, my other country. So yeah, it's very difficult, and here I will concur with what Marko was saying. It's very difficult to speak about leadership, about front runners, if it is obvious that when you take a panoramic picture across the region, we are still pretty much on the very same level of preparedness to join the EU. And I agree with Marko, that goes as well to Montenegro, who has the best chance at this moment to go faster than the rest of the region. In Serbia's case, it is obvious that three major elements will continue to be the most important for the continuation and dynamism of the EU accession process, and these are two which are embedded into the negotiating framework of the European Union, and these are the progress in area of rule of law, but also normalization of relations with Kosovo. And here it will obviously take two to tango. So in a sense, Serbia and Kosovo are presented by the choice whether they will start seriously addressing the deficiencies of the mutual relationship and try to find some compromise that would move both countries forward towards the EU integration path, or are they going to remain stuck in the past and become a dead weight around the legs of the rest of the region? In this situation, I wouldn't be surprised if there is clusterization of the region in two groups or maybe more of those acceding to the EU, where certainly Serbia and Kosovo will not be among the first. So the alarms are loud, I would say, ever since 2022, the war of aggression of Ukraine, as we all pretty well know. But unfortunately, we still do not see this honesty and sincereness in dedication to the reforms for Serbia to get closer to the fulfilling of the membership criteria. I will stop here, and I would be glad to answer questions if there are any. Thank you very much.
Thank you, as always, for a sharp analysis, Sevgen, and I thank all partners for managing to go through the documents. They've been published less than 24 hours ago. We should not underestimate the efforts of the partners that have been committed to really presenting their view of those reports to the audience. Before we go to Q&A section, I would like to say to Miloš Pavković, I haven't forgotten about him. We might extend this webinar maybe 10 to 15 minutes. I hope that our guests will be fine with it. We had a lot of questions, and naturally this prolonged a bit the entire webinar. So I would like Miloš to zoom in on the sub-area of the fundamentals called functioning of democratic institutions, and to give us his overview and to build upon what Srđan said, to what extent actually the Commission adopted some of the recommendations we gave them last year, and what should they do in the following period. Thanks. And after you're done, we go to Q&A section.
Thank you, Strahinja. It's my honor to be with you today and to present findings of our research. I will just ask our technical support to prepare my PowerPoint presentation, but before my presentation starts, I just wanted to say quick introduction about my topic. So basically, I zoomed in the in the area of functioning of democratic institutions for all 6 Western Balkan countries. So basically, since 2022, European Policy Center has been monitoring and reporting on this area, and especially taking into account the Commission's reports and its methodology on reporting this area. So basically, we can move on to the next slide at this point. We produced a paper as so a quick outline. What I'm going to talk about is just a quick introduction of the project. Also, main findings of the research on democracy. Here I will quickly cover methodology, how we mapped policy elements in the Commission's reports and measured its consistency, and then how we quantified the democracy or functioning of democratic institutions in the Western Balkan countries. And finally, I took also a quick look at the 2024 enlargement package that was published yesterday. We can move to the next slide. So basically, this research was part of the project titled Towards Better Monitoring of Democracy in the Western Balkans, which was kindly supported by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland and Kalevi Sorsa Foundation from Finland and Progress Institute from North Macedonia. And it was jointly implemented by the European Policy Center and the European Policy Institute from Skopje. And the final outcome of this project is discussion paper, which focuses on the functioning of democratic institutions. We can move on to the next slide, please. So basically, when it comes to our methodology, so now I'm moving on to main findings of the paper, and our main methodology was developed 2 years ago that we use again. It was a kind of replication study, and in the first step, we mapped all the policy elements in each country report for 6 Western Balkan countries, this was very complex part of the job for us. And the second step was that we needed to cross-reference these mapped policy elements with different indicators and sub-indicators from third-party indexes. We use Freedom House, Nations in Transit, and Freedom in the World reports, but also we use democracy reports of the varieties of democracy. Third step was to rescale these third-party indicators on a 1 to 5 scale, which is the approach the Commission uses to measure level of preparedness and progress. And the final step was to quantify functioning of democratic institutions. So we may go to the next slide. When it comes to the mapping of policy elements, the European Commission uses these 5 pillars of democracy in its reports, which is elections, parliament, governance, civil society, and civilian oversight of security forces and security sector. Within these 5 pillars, we measured hundreds of different policy elements that we then tried to cross-reference with third-party indicators. Next slide, please. As you know, this is very complex job. So basically, we have 3 layers of consistency among elements. I don't want to go too deep into the methodology. So basically, what I'm going to present here is the final layer, which covers both implicitly and explicitly covered elements, whereby all the unnecessary elements are already excluded. So basically, this part of the statistics shows the best possible assessment on consistency that the Commission could get. So basically, when it comes to elections, we see that the overall consistency is around 63%, which is kind of good level. But if you zoom into individual countries, we see that, for instance, in the case of Serbia, Macedonia, and Kosovo, that the levels of consistency are slightly lower compared to other countries, which lowers down the regional consistency. So this is the recommendation for the Commission, also to the future reports, to pay attention for these 3 countries when it comes to elections. Now we can move on to the second pillar, which is the parliament. And basically, when it comes to parliament, we are still at a good level of consistency, with Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kosovo also lagging behind the other countries, but we have very advanced level of consistency in the case of North Macedonia and Serbia. Now we can move on to the governance section. in the government section, this was the most difficult one for mapping, because in the government section we had the biggest number of technical elements and the lowest comparability among the reports, which subsequently reflected also on the quantification and comparability on the countries in this area. We see that 4 out of 6 countries are in the lower category, in the moderate consistency category. Now we can move on to the next slide, which is civil society. This is the most consistent part in the European Commission reports for almost all countries. In the last report, only Macedonia was slightly lower, but the most problematic was, which is on the next slide, is the civilian oversight of security forces, where we have the lowest level of consistency, because in the 3 countries, which is Albania, Kosovo, and Montenegro, we didn't have at all reports on this area, which significantly affects the comparability among the countries. But this part is also was impossible to find third-party indicators to quantify. So basically, this part was excluded from quantification. Now we can move on to the section on quantification, and on the next slide I will only present the final results. Okay, sorry, we have here regional overview, so we can see actually that if we compare with the last year, consistency has slightly dropped in this year's Commission report. The result for this is that the Commission increased its number of policy elements that it reports in 1 or 2 countries, but then not in others, which basically resulted in a slightly lower percentage here. Now we can move on to the next slide, which is basically discussion on consistency, and is there a need to have completely standardized reports for all countries, basically to include all the same elements. And here we are opening the debate on whether to have standardized reports, but also on the other hand we have priority to national contexts, and I think that these two are not mutually exclusive, that basically we can have at the same time standardized reports which would encompass all the key crucial democracy related elements for each and every country, but we can also have some national context that might be different. But our proposal was that the Commission should unburden the report from technical elements, and sometimes the scope for policy elements is too wide, and there is a necessity to narrow the scope when it comes to certain policy elements. Now we can move on to the quantification, and we will see the results. Basically, all countries except Serbia, well, all countries are in the same category, which is a moderate level. It's between grades 3 and 4 on a scale on 1 to 5. But it's important to know that Serbia was the only country that recorded backsliding compared to the last year's report, while Bosnia was the only country that it made a slight improvement, but it was enough to move to the next category, to the moderate level. We've seen that there was not a huge leap forward in all the countries, but what is necessary is, if the countries want to join the European Union, we need to see average grade more than 4, so 4 point something, more towards 5, which is the best grade if you want functioning democracies to be allowed to enter the European Union. Now we can move on to the next slide, which is basically I analyzed the results of the enlargement package of this year. The most important, let's say, news in this enlargement package is that we now have some kind of assessment that the Commission provided for the democracy area. We can move to the next slide. So basically, I analyzed. Next one, please. So here it is. I analyzed the 9 reports for the Western Balkans, but also Eastern European countries, including Turkey. And the Commission this time provided some form of assessment of democracy. Mind you, this is not an official methodology of the Commission. This is just a result of my quick analysis that I had the time to conduct yesterday. So basically, if you take a look at the reports for different countries, we can actually map out some kind of assessment. So basically, in the case of Turkey report, the Commission stated that the democracy is severely hampered. And then in the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, functioning democratic institutions is undermined, according to the Commission. Then next level or next kind of assessment would be that the democracy is affected by certain challenges, which can be seen in the reports of Georgia and Kosovo. For Serbia, Commission used the wording which is mixed track record, which is somewhere in the middle. Albania had partially satisfactory level of democracy, while Moldova and North Macedonia have been assessed as mostly satisfactory. The best, let's say, grade or assessment received Montenegro, which got satisfactory grade. And it's interestingly enough, this kind of assessment of these levels of assessment mostly aligns with our quantification of what the average grade was for our quantification assessment. So basically, this is let's say a good step of the Commission, and I hope that this methodology will be used in the next reports and will be operationalized furthermore. Now we can move to the next slide, and I have just two, three more slides, and I'm finishing. So also some important changes that I noted in the functioning of democratic institutions in the 2024 reports is that it is substantially revised. Now we have a new pillar in democracy, which is integration. This is where the Commission now officially assesses strategic orientation of the country towards EU, its alignment with EU acquis and other statistics that are available. It's important. It's good to know that integration is missing from Georgia's and Turkey's report, which might be telling on actually that in these two countries, integration or strategic orientation towards the EU integration is lacking. Also, this section has now been quite shorter and more precise from what I could see from yesterday's report. So basically, I'm coming back to what Srđan mentioned, that the Commission has shown interest and has heard what the civil society has been talking and recommending in the last few years regarding the democracy reports. What is still problematic is civilian oversight of security services. It's still missing in quite a number of reports, but also it's terminology that is used, because in case of Moldova and North Macedonia, it's civilian oversight of security and intelligence sector. In the case of Turkey, it's civilian oversight of the security forces. So basically, this terminological difference has also substantial consequences on how and what is reported under this section. Now we can move on to the next slide, which is basically my concluding remarks. What I want to say at the end of the day, the European Commission has made a bold, I would say bold step in the right direction when it comes to the reporting on democracy. There is still yet more to come, I hope. Reports have been unburdened from some technical details. And what I would suggest also for the Commission in the future is to use this to materialize this, let's say, level of assessments provided in this year's reports, but also to provide progress on a year-to-year basis, progress reports for the functioning of democratic institutions, because it would be very useful both for candidate countries, but also for civil society in candidate countries. And finally, my final slide is actually thank you note, and also the reference to for our report that is published by European Policy Center. I will also send the link in the chat. I'm really grateful for all the more than 100 people who stayed throughout the whole webinar and listened to my presentation as well. I'm also open to questions and comments regarding the functioning of democratic institutions and also our report. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It is quite a pleasure to see that the work of a single think tank has produced positive spillover effects on the entire Commission's work when it comes to assessing the functioning of the democratic institutions in all of the candidate countries. But as you know, that there are still some gaps. There could be filled in, and we hope that in the next enlargement package that this area will gain even more in its importance. At the same time, a couple of people told me they couldn't see all the data in your presentation because the screen, Milos, was a bit smaller. So I told them to check the publication and gave them the link. But in any case, go to our website, check the publication, or text Milos directly, and I'm sure he'll be more than happy to give you his thoughts and clarifications. Now we've passed the 2-hour mark. I'm happy to see that there's so many people still attending, which reaffirms the overall quality of the discussion. Now, of course, this is the last section, and we're supposed to be wrapping it up. And that's why we have 4 questions for the time being. And once we go through them, we can conclude this interesting webinar. The first one goes to Dea from Pristina. If you could elaborate the Commission's report on the national minorities, if you can go into details on how the Commission views the issue of national minorities in its reporting for the latest enlargement package. Then Marco has 2 questions. First one is about the European Commission sending some false signals, and how damaging is it that it is harboring this false optimism? How damaging is it in the long run? And the second question to Marco is, what does the government need to do? One single thing that it needs to do. What is the most important thing that needs to be done to make 2026 a reality? And another question is, why hasn't it been done up until this point? And finally, to Milos, maybe a lot of people criticize Serbia for its autocratic tendencies. So how will this essentially affect its path towards the European Union? So maybe we can start with that.
Yes, thank you for the question. Indeed, the report recognizes and talks about the non-majority rights, non-majority community rights in Kosovo. It initially recognizes the good legal framework that Kosovo has and also a good institutional framework. However, the relations in the past year, especially between the government and the Kosovo Serb community, are noted to have remained very difficult. As we know, during the last year, the government had some measures in the north which undermined the living conditions of the Kosovo Serbs that live in that area, which are also noted in this report. While some of these measures were in line with some of the agreements reached on the dialogue, they were all imposed without any prior consultation with the community and thus disregarding the community's needs at some cases. And we agree that all of these measures should have been more given more transitional period as well as proper information campaigns, which is also noted on the report. The report, on another hand, also mentions that following the resignation of many Kosovo Serbs from Kosovo institutions, this year a new wave of recruitment happened where successfully 75 Kosovo Serbs have been recruited for positions within the Kosovo police, which for us is kind of an achievement compared to the last year dynamics. But overall, we agree that the legal frameworks are in place and are in line with EU principles that guarantee human rights, but more should be done by Kosovo government to make sure that non-majority communities are treated with priority when fulfilling the government's political agendas.
All right, thank you very much. Marco, your turn.
Thank you for the questions. I would just, the question was about false optimism, and I might have added to this notion that it is spreading. It's not far from truth because what we are afraid of is the kind of a sense of simulation of reforms that we have been very critical of in the past, before 2020, when Montenegro was assessed as a captured state, as a state in which negotiations were almost suspended. We were also some kind of leaders in the region. So now we should also take all of these kind of compliments that we are receiving with a pinch of salt, as they say, and we should get back to real work, because if you read the report closely and not only listen to what the officials and politicians say, there is so much work left to be done. And what we are most afraid of, as you heard in the keynote speech, there is now this very intense cooperation between the government and the European Commission. There is an intense dialogue about detailed planning of the work for closing 26 chapters, actually 30 chapters in the next 2 years. We are afraid of this haste. We are afraid of this closed dialogue and it's not being too transparent. And we are afraid that substantial reforms will be sacrificed in order to get this overdone as quickly as possible. We are, of course, hopeful because the report also emphasizes the practical and implementation side of the reforms. If you look at the recommendations that we are now issued in this new report, they mostly pertain to the need to implement certain aspects. But we also ask the European Commission to be fully transparent with the Montenegrin people. We are being, for example, Montenegrin MPs and the public in general is not in the same position with the government in terms of their communication, the communication between the European Commission and the government regarding legal proposals, for example. MPs are not being delivered the opinions of the European Commission, and then the government can manipulate them and the public opinion, saying, interpreting on EU's behalf what the European Commission has said that we need to do regarding certain laws or legal proposals. This is a humiliating position. Everything needs to be transparent. Everything needs to be open and available to all stakeholders in the decision-making process. Otherwise, we are second-rate stakeholders and we are kind of always lagging behind. And the other question about what we need to do is, yeah, I actually answered that. So it's substantial reforms, it's implementation, and also not forgetting that what we are all doing is because of the transformative power of the integration process. We are not doing this in order to provisionally close 26 chapters in 30 chapters in 2 years, but in order to reform our society. This is our only chance, and we at least plan to use it as much as we can. And if that includes criticizing the European Commission for its approach, well, so be it.
Thank you. Now I would like to turn attention to Miloš, and just to note the last questions we got for Srdjan. The first one is on sterilitocracy. Do you think this phenomenon will continue in the coming years? Particularly, maybe you can reflect on the latest visit of Ursula von der Leyen to the region. And the second question is on the US elections. They're supposed to take place in a couple of days. What happens with EU enlargement if Trump wins? And now, Miloš, going back to you with the question that was posed to you.
Thank you, Strahinja. So the question about autocracy, basically our research showed as well backsliding of Serbia in terms of democracy, especially when it comes to the pillar of elections. So basically, Serbia is now the worst rated country when it comes to elections in the region, but also in the overall assessment, Serbia's grade on a scale of 1 to 5 is 3.08, which is the lowest among all other Western Balkan countries. So basically, we didn't name the categories. So this is moderate rating, basically. We didn't name this category as authoritarian regime, but the Freedom House and the varieties of democracy, basically the reports from which we borrowed the data, also put Serbia in they call it somewhere as of a hybrid regime or something in between democracy and autocracy. So basically, Serbia has elements of both, and it's clear to everyone that with such state of play in the functioning for democratic institutions, it's not going to be feasible for Serbia to join the European Union. So it's now up to the European Union to put pressure on Serbia and stress the importance of this issue. From my point of view, it looks like that this policy of stabilitocracy from the EU side also contributed to the backsliding in terms of democracy in Serbia. So basically, I think that as years are passing by, there should not and will not be room for Serbia to wiggle its way around the democracy, and that this question would be put forward, will be in focus of the European Union in the upcoming reports and upcoming period.
Thank you very much, and we'll conclude the webinar with Srđan Majstorović. I apologize to some people whose questions I couldn't put on the agenda. Otherwise, we would go up to 3 hours long, and we wouldn't like to break that record. So, Srđan, going to you.
Well, nurturing the culture of dialogue within the European Policy Center, I will beg to disagree with my colleague Miloš. I think stabilitocracy is here to stay. What is very wrong in the perception is the fact that stabilitocracy does not mean stability. Stabilitocracy is a regime which depends on one person, and all the regimes throughout the history who depend on one person ended in a very volatile fashion. So in that way, stabilitocracy maybe buys you some time. You can behave in a pragmatic and opportunistic way, but unfortunately, it's not going to add to regional stability. And this is the lesson that we all need to learn once and for all. And yes, it is quite awkward to listen sometimes high-level EU officials to praise the authoritarian regimes in this region, behaving like nothing is happening. And mind you, we are not naive. We are aware that behind a closed door, the European Commission representatives and the member states are probably delivering a more strict messages to the governments. But what counts is what you are saying in front of the microphone. And unfortunately, these messages do not correspond in a substance with your own country report for Serbia, for example. And that does not contribute to integrity of the process, to due diligence, if you wish, or credibility of the process. So in the geopolitical context that we are living in, unfortunately, I am afraid that I'm concerned that stabilitocracy is here to stay. With regards to the US elections, I think, yeah, the EU is eagerly, as we are in the region, awaiting next week's elections in the EU to see what is going to happen. I mean, the ramifications of the US elections in the region should be most visible through intersection of what's going on in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in between Serbia and Kosovo, but also in North Macedonia and its relations with their own neighbors. So I'm quite positive that everybody is very eagerly awaiting to see the results. The previous administration left the White House leaving behind some ideas of resolution of especially Kosovo and Serbia, issue between Kosovo and Serbia, normalization issue between Kosovo and Serbia, which was not well perceived by the majority of the EU member states. We might witness, if there is a return of the previous administration, some fresh ideas, which will most certainly not contribute to normalization, but also stabilization of the situation in the region, because mind you, next February Kosovo has local elections. Are they local or general?
Parliamentary elections.
Parliamentary elections. Thank you, Miloš. So yeah, in these circumstances, I don't think that ideas like, division of the territory of Kosovo that was previously promoted by the previous administration will fall onto a fertile ground, especially in Kosovo, and we all know that destabilization is still a possibility. So yes, geopolitics is there. It's going to stay, but we need to be cautious not to overshadow the values upon which the whole EU has been founded, and that these do not become just a collateral to overemphasizing of the geopolitics. And I will end with a word of caution, similar to what Marko said. I would advocate for all of us to be careful when we are promoting a reform agenda and growth plan. My personal opinion is that it has been overhyped in a way, that this is a magic wand which is going to resolve all of our outstanding issues. We are prone, and we tend to oversimplify issues. Unfortunately, the quality of our media is not at a level that can analyze what exactly is the difference between the growth plan, reforms agendas, and the EU integration process. So please, when communicating, and this is a message to our European Commission colleagues, make sure that you emphasize the importance of the reforms which are within the EU accession process and in countries negotiating in negotiations, while scaling down a bit, I would say, the hype around the reform agenda that has been perceived as some sort of a supernatural force, which is going to, push region into the EU. It's not designed for that. It doesn't have a capacity to do that. It has its role. It is important, but please do not overhype it. Then this is where I will stop, and I will excuse because I have another meeting that I'm already late to attend. So Thank you very much for your attention.
No, thank you for staying a bit longer. I thank all the audience for also staying longer. It just proved how dynamic and interesting the conversation was. With this, we conclude the webinar. Let me just greet you once again and invite you to join us to discuss 2025 enlargement package this time next year around. In the meantime, all the best. Thank you.